I had always believed that kindness and trust were my greatest strengths. At 26, I had carved a small space for myself in the corporate world, not flashy, not loud, just steady, competent, and reliable. My colleagues knew me as gentle, approachable, and careful. I liked it that way. It gave me a sense of control, a quiet comfort in a world that often demanded more than it gave. The company party that year was supposed to be light, fun, a brief escape from the deadlines and pressures that ruled our weekdays. The large conference room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of people catching up after months of long projects. I adjusted my dress in the reflection of the glass doors, taking a deep breath. I wanted to feel confident, not nervous. I always had a tendency to overthink, but tonight I told myself I'd just enjoy the evening. Then there was him, Ethan. My colleague, someone I had worked alongside for 3 years. He had always been charming in small doses, offering a smile here, a joke there, and a professional compliment every so often. But somewhere along the line, I began to notice subtle shifts in his behavior. Little digs disguised as teasing, comments that lingered longer than necessary, a quiet satisfaction when my ideas were overlooked. I had brushed it off, blaming myself for overthinking. After all, who would want to believe a trusted coworker could harbor such quiet malice? That night, Ethan approached me with that familiar smile, shaking my hand too firmly, leaning in just enough to make the gesture feel more like an assertion than camaraderie. "You've really been shining on the Harris project," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. My heart gave a little flutter, recognition felt good. I smiled back, trying not to read too much into it. We talked for a few minutes, surrounded by laughter and the clatter of champagne flutes, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax. But then I noticed the way his eyes flicked toward the small group near the buffet. There was something calculating there, something cold beneath the warmth he projected. I shook off the feeling. Perhaps I was being paranoid. I had learned to trust people, and maybe it was time to keep doing just that. I had always believed in observing people quietly, in giving them the benefit of the doubt. I had seen how trust could grow slowly, how kindness could break walls down. And yet, there was a part of me that had started noticing the subtle inconsistencies in how Ethan spoke of me when he thought I wasn't listening. He praised my work to my face, but behind closed doors, he had a habit of minimizing my contributions, taking credit in small, almost imperceptible ways. That evening, as I moved through the party, I smiled, I nodded, I laughed politely at jokes that weren't always funny. I reminded myself that this was a celebration, not a competition. But beneath the surface, I was aware of the tension, the quiet rivalries, the little invisible battles that happened in offices like this every day. I was aware that not everyone was as they appeared. And though it made me uneasy, I told myself I could handle it. I had always managed. I had always survived. And so I smiled, unaware that this party, this moment of casual laughter and music, would be the very stage where the trust one had so carefully built would be tested. I didn't know then that kindness could be mistaken for weakness, that observation could be a shield, and that silence could become a weapon. But even in my gentle optimism, there was a quiet strength growing inside me, a sense that, one day, I would see clearly, act wisely, and protect the dignity I had so long cherished. The laughter and music didn't last long for me. Somewhere between the hors d'oeuvres and the clinking glasses, Ethan's charm slipped into something colder, sharper, and unmistakably deliberate. I was standing near the punch table, talking quietly with a few coworkers I trusted, when I felt the shift in the room, the subtle tightening of the air, a change that only comes when someone decides to make a scene. Ethan approached, a wide, rehearsed smile plastered across his face. "Mind if I interrupt for a moment?" he asked, his tone sweet but laced with something I recognized immediately: control. Before I could respond, he had grabbed my attention and, without warning, began recounting a minor mistake I had made on a report months ago, a mistake so small it had been forgotten by everyone else. He exaggerated it, stretched it out for dramatic effect, and punctuated it with laughter that made the room turn its focus toward me. My heart sank, a heavy weight pressing into my chest. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, the whispers brushing against my skin like cold fingers. My first instinct was to protest, to defend myself, to explain that it had been a tiny error corrected weeks ago. But the words caught in my throat. I realized that this was more than a mistake being brought up, it was an attempt to humiliate, to make me look foolish in front of everyone. For a moment, the room blurred. I could hear laughter, feel the stares, sense the curiosity and judgment swirling around me. It stung deeply, not because of the error itself, but because of the betrayal. I had trusted him, had worked alongside him for years, had shared ideas and late-night project updates, believing he respected me. And yet here he was, weaponizing that trust, turning a social gathering into a battlefield. I wanted to shrink, to hide, to disappear somewhere quiet where the sting of humiliation couldn't reach me. But then something inside me shifted, just slightly, a calm awareness that this moment didn't define me, that his words didn't hold the power he hoped they would. I let my body relax, keeping my expression neutral, listening to every exaggerated word, every forced laugh, every carefully placed dig. I had been observing him quietly for months. Now, I realized, I could observe with intention. What he didn't know, and what no one else in the room could see, was that my phone had been recording the entire conversation. I hadn't planned it, it had been a habit to keep my meetings and discussions documented, but it became a lifeline in that moment. I held it discreetly, pretending to check messages, as the performance unfolded. Every smirk, every exaggerated gesture, every attempt to undermine me was captured. I felt a quiet, almost imperceptible satisfaction, not in revenge, not in anger, but in the knowledge that truth had a way of catching up. I let him finish, letting the tension hang in the room for a beat longer than necessary. The whispers continued, but I stayed still, calm and composed, like water that refuses to be shaken by the storm. And then, just before I could gather my courage to respond, he moved on, satisfied that he had made his point. The room slowly returned to chatter, but the seed of discomfort had been planted. I felt the weight of the betrayal settle in my chest, heavy but not paralyzing. I realized that humiliation, when carefully observed and quietly held, could be transformed into clarity, into insight, into quiet power. That night, I left the party feeling a strange mix of hurt and resolve. Betrayal had a bitter taste, but it also revealed truths I had been too trusting to see before. I understood now that some people wore smiles like masks, and some moments required patience, silence, and careful observation. I promised myself that I would not react impulsively. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, truth would speak louder than any performance, louder than any laughter, louder than any smug smile. After the party, I spent the next few days in a strange fog. I went through my routine at work, smiling politely, exchanging small talk, attending meetings, but inside, I felt hollow and tense. Ethan's words replayed in my mind like a broken record, his laughter echoing in places I didn't expect, the quiet of my apartment, the hum of my computer, even in the middle of a meeting where he was nowhere near. I didn't tell anyone how I felt. I didn't cry to friends, I didn't complain to management, and I certainly didn't confront him. I had learned something crucial from the moment itself: reacting immediately often gave others the satisfaction of control. True strength, I realized, was quiet. Observing, listening, understanding, and waiting. I poured myself into work, not as a distraction, but as a means to anchor myself, to maintain clarity while emotions swirled beneath the surface. Every interaction with Ethan became a careful observation. I watched how he spoke to others, how he took credit for small wins, how he laughed a little too long when someone else made a minor mistake. I noted the subtle hierarchy he tried to assert, the ways he manipulated perception without overt aggression. And through this, I began to see not just him, but the patterns of workplace behavior I had once ignored. The betrayal, painful as it was, became a lens through which I could see clearly. I also realized the importance of protecting my dignity. I deleted no emails, saved no evidence unnecessarily, but I made sure that my work, my words, and my achievements were documented, quietly undeniable. I stopped seeking validation from anyone but myself. I started to understand that self-respect wasn't loud or performative, it was calm, consistent, and rooted in truth. At home, I replayed the recording in my mind. I didn't need to listen to it repeatedly, but I remembered the smugness on his face, the deliberate timing of each insult. And I felt a strange, almost liberating sense of control. The moment had already passed. The sting of betrayal had softened into awareness. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted him to exist in the same space as me, but with the reality of his actions quietly laid bare. Friends noticed the change in me. I was calmer, quieter, more measured in my responses. They asked if I was upset about the party, and I simply smiled, saying nothing. There was power in silence, and in that silence I was reclaiming my energy. I began to see that strength wasn't in proving someone wrong immediately, it was in allowing truth to unfold naturally, in maintaining composure while the world continued its noisy performance. It wasn't easy. At times, I felt the familiar pangs of anger, the desire to speak up, to point out every misstep and expose the unfairness of it all. But I resisted. I reminded myself that dignity cannot be forced, it cannot be performed for an audience. It is quietly lived, quietly claimed, and quietly defended. By the end of the week, I noticed a subtle shift, not in him, but in myself. The betrayal no longer had the same sharpness. It became a teacher, guiding me toward patience, observation, and strategic calm. I had discovered that the most effective way to respond to humiliation wasn't through confrontation or anger, but through measured presence, thoughtful reflection, and careful preparation. And deep inside, I knew that the moment of reckoning would come. Not because I sought it, not because I planned it, but because truth has a way of surfacing naturally, like water seeping through stone. And when it did, I would be ready, not as a victim, not as a fighter, but as someone who understood the quiet, undeniable power of inner strength. The day finally came when everything shifted, though I had not forced it. It wasn't with loud accusations, dramatic confrontations, or pointed humiliations. It came quietly, naturally, through patience, observation, and truth waiting to be seen. It was another company gathering, this time a small departmental meeting. Ethan strutted in, the same confident air he always wore like a shield. His smug smile greeted the room as he shared updates, claiming credit for projects and subtly minimizing others' contributions. But I had changed. I no longer flinched at his presence, no longer feared his judgment. I simply watched, calm, aware, grounded in the knowledge that his performance of control was only temporary. When it came my turn to present, I spoke slowly and clearly, letting the data, the work, and the truth do the talking. Nothing personal, nothing vengeful, just facts. Every achievement, every contribution I had made, laid out plainly for everyone to see. I saw Ethan's eyes flicker, a brief tightening of his jaw, the smallest crack in his otherwise confident facade. But I didn't react. I stayed poised, composed, and dignified. And then, in a moment that felt almost surreal, I quietly played the recording from the party a few weeks prior. The room fell silent immediately, the hum of casual chatter vanishing like mist. There was no dramatic commentary from me, no snide remark, no gloating satisfaction, just truth captured clearly and unmistakably. Ethan's words, his laughter, his deliberate attempt to humiliate me, all preserved for everyone to hear. I watched him carefully, not with anger, but with a calm awareness of reality. The smugness that had once defined him evaporated. His colleagues shifted in their seats, exchanging subtle glances that spoke louder than words. The air in the room was tense, heavy with recognition, but I remained serene. I had no need to explain, to justify, to fight for respect, it was there, inherent in my composure, my restraint, my quiet confidence. Ethan's face went pale, the practiced charm replaced by the faintest edge of panic. I could see it in his posture, the way he adjusted his tie nervously, the hesitation in his speech. The natural consequences of his actions had arrived, not through my aggression, but simply through truth, patience, and observation. It was a lesson he could not ignore, and one he could not charm his way out of. After the playback, I didn't gloat. I didn't speak further. I simply nodded, gathered my notes, and continued with the meeting. The room adjusted back to business, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Ethan no longer held the same control, the same illusion of dominance. Quietly, without spectacle, dignity had reclaimed its place. Walking out of the office later, I felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anxiety, they had all been real, and they had stung, but they had also taught me something invaluable. Strength isn't loud. Power isn't in retaliation. True self-respect comes from knowing your worth, holding your boundaries, and allowing truth to unfold in its own time. I understood finally that life's lessons are rarely immediate or dramatic. Sometimes, they are quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. And sometimes, the most profound victories are the ones that require patience, observation, and calm resolve. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I smiled softly to myself. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and subtle cruelty. I had endured it without losing my sense of self. And in that endurance, in that quiet strength, I had discovered the truest form of justice, not revenge, not spectacle, but dignity, inner peace, and the knowledge that truth, in its own time, always rises.